The Moscow Metro is a rapid transit system serving Moscow, Russia and the neighbouring Moscow Oblast towns of Krasnogorsk, Reutov and Kotelniki. Opened in 1935 with one 11-kilometre line and 13 stations, it was the first underground railway system in the Soviet Union. As of 2016, the Moscow Metro has 200 stations and its route length is 333.3 kilometers, making it the busiest metro system outside of Asia and the fifth longest in the world. The system is mostly underground, with the deepest section 74 meters underground at the Park Pobedy station, one of the world's deepest. Operation: the Moscow Metro, a state-owned enterprise, is 331.4 kilometers long and consists of 12 lines and 200 stations organized in a spoke-hub distribution paradigm, with the majority of rail lines running radially from the center of Moscow to the outlying areas. The Kozyeva line forms a 20-kilometer-long ring which enables passenger travel between these spokes. Most stations and lines are underground, but some lines have at-grade and elevated sections. The Filyovskaya line is the one line mostly at grade. Of the metro's 200 stations, 75 are deep underground, 108 are shallow, and 17 are at or above ground level. The deep stations comprise 55 triple-vaulted pylon stations, 19 triple-vaulted column stations, and one single-vault station. The shallow stations comprise 72 spanned column stations, 33 single-vaulted stations, and 3 single-span stations. In addition, there are 12 ground-level stations, 4 elevated stations, and 1 station on a bridge. 2 stations have 3 tracks, and 1 has double halls. 7 of the stations have side platforms. In addition, there were 2 temporary stations within rail yards. 1 station is reserved for future service. The Moscow Metro uses the Russian gauge of 1,520 mm, like other Russian railways, and an underrunning third rail with a supply of 825 volts DC. The average distance between stations is 1.7 kilometers. The shortest long section is between Vystokna and Mishtunarodnaya, and the longest long is between Kryletskoye and Strogino. Long distances between stations have the positive effect of a high cruising speed of 41.7 km per hour. Moscow Metro starts opening at 5:25 and closes at 1 o'clock. The precise opening time varies at different stations according to the arrival of the first train, but all stations simultaneously close their entrances at 1 a.m. for maintenance and set transfer corridors. The minimum interval between trains is 90 seconds during the morning and evening rush hours. As of 2013, the system has an average daily ridership of 6.73 million passengers with the peak of 9.28 million. Each line is identified by a name, an alphanumeric index, and a color. The color assigned to each line for display on maps and signs is its colloquial identifier, except for the nondescript greens and blues assigned to the Kakhovskaya, the Zamoskvoretskaya, the Lyublinsko-Dmitrovskaya, and Butovskaya lines. The upcoming station is announced by a male voice on inbound trains to the city centre and by a female voice on outbound trains. The metro has a connection to the Moscow monorail, a 4.7 km, 6-station monorail line between Timir-Yuzevskaya and VDNKH, which opened in January 2008. Prior to the official opening, the monorail had operated in excursion mode since 2004. The colors in the table below correspond with the colors of the lines in the official Moscow Metro map. Platforms and train lengths. Since the beginning, platforms have been at least 155 meters long to accommodate 8-car trains. The only exceptions are on the Filiovskaya line, Vystokna, Международная Studentskaya, Kutuzovskaya, Fili, Bagratianovskaya, Filayovsky Park and Pionirskaya, which only allows 6-car trains. Trains on the Zamostofretskaya, Kaluzsko-Rizhskaya, Tagansko-Krasnopreznenskaya, Kalinинskaya, Serpukovsko-Timir-Yuzevskaya and Lyublinsko-Dmitrovskaya lines have 8 cars. On the Sokolnicheskaya line 7 cars and on the Kozyeva and Kakhovskaya line 6 cars. The Filiovskaya and Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya lines had 6 and 7-car trains as well, but now use 4 and 5-car trains of another type. Rolling stock on the Kozyeva line is being replaced with these articulated 81-740-741st Verzage 4-car trains. The Butovskaya line was designed by different standards and has shorter long platforms. It employs articulated 81-740-741st trains, which consist of 3 cars. History. The first plans for a metro system in Moscow date back to the Russian Empire but were postponed by World War I, the October Revolution and the Russian Civil War. In 1923, the Moscow City Council formed the Underground Railway Design Office at the Moscow Board of Urban Railways. It carried out preliminary studies, and by 1928 had developed a project for the first route from Sokolniki to the city center. At the same time, an offer was made to German company Siemens Bohr Union to submit its own project for the same route. In June 1931, the decision to begin construction of the Moscow Metro was made by the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In January 1932 the plan for the first lines was approved, and on the 21st of March 1933 the Soviet government approved a plan for 10 lines with a total route length of 80 kilometers. The first lines were built using the Moscow General Plan designed by Lazar Kaganovich, along with his project managers in the 1930s-1950s, and the metro was named after him until 1955. The Moscow Metro construction engineers consulted with the counterparts from the London Underground, the world's oldest metro system. Partly because of this connection, the design of the Gans Hill Tube Station in London, which was completed much later, is reminiscent of a Moscow metro station. Soviet workers did the labor and the artwork, but the main engineering designs, routes, and construction plans were handled by specialists recruited from the London Underground. The Britons called for tunneling instead of the cut-and-cover technique, the use of escalators instead of lifts, the routes, and the design of the rolling stock. The paranoia of the NKVD was evident when the secret police arrested numerous British engineers for espionage because they gained an in-depth knowledge of the city's physical layout. Engineers for the Metropolitan Vickers Electrical Company were given a show trial and deported in 1933, ending the role of British business in the USSR. First 4 stages of construction. The first line was opened to the public on the 15th of May 1935 at 7 a.m. It was 11 kilometers long and included 13 stations. The day was celebrated as a technological and ideological victory for socialism. An estimated 285,000 people rode the metro at its debut, and its design was greeted with pride. Street celebrations included parades, plays and concerts. The Bolshoi Theatre presented a choral performance by 2,200 metro workers, 55,000 colored posters and 25,000 copies of Songs of the Joyous Metro Conquerors were distributed. This publicity barrage produced by the Soviet government, stressed the superiority of the Moscow metro over all other metros in capitalist societies and the metro's role as a prototype for the Soviet future. The Moscow metro averaged 47 kilometers per hour and had a top speed of 80 kilometers per hour. In comparison, New York City subway trains averaged a slower 25 miles per hour and had a top speed of 45 miles per hour. While the celebration was an expression of popular joy, it was also an effective propaganda display, legitimizing the metro and declaring it a success. The initial line connected Sokolniki.Opened, then branching to Park Pobedy and Smolenskaya. The latter branch was extended westwards to a new station in March 1937. The first metro line crossing the Moskva River over the Smolensky Metro Bridge. The second stage was completed before the war. In March 1938, the Arbatskaya branch was split and extended to the Kurskaya station. In September 1938, the Gorkhovskaya line opened between Sokol and Teatralnaya. Here the architecture was based on that of the most popular stations in existence, while following the popular Art Deco style. It was merged with socialist themes. The first deep-level column station Manyukovskaya was built at the same time. Building work on the third stage was delayed during World War II, and two metro sections were put into service. Teatralnaya, Avtozavodskaya and Kurskaya Partizanskaya were inaugurated in 1943 and 1944, respectively. War motifs replaced socialist visions in the architectural design of these stations. During the Siege of Moscow in the fall and winter of 1941, metro stations were used as air raid shelters. The Council of Ministers moved its offices to the Manyukovskaya platforms, where Stalin made public speeches on several occasions. The Chistaya Prudy station was also walled off, and the headquarters of the air defense established there. After the war ended in 1945, construction began on the fourth stage of the metro, which included the Kozyevaya line, a deep part of the Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya line from Ploshchad Revolyutsy to Ivskaya, and a surface extension to Pervomayskaya during the early 1950s. The decoration and design characteristic of the Moscow metro is considered to have reached its zenith in these stations. The Kozyevaya line was first planned as a line running under the Garden Ring, a wide avenue encircling the borders of Moscow's city center. The first part of the line, from Park Pobedy to Kurskaya, follows this avenue. Plans were later changed and the northern part of the Ring Line runs 1 to 1.5 kilometers outside the Sadovoy Koltso, thus providing service for 7 rail terminals. The next part of the Kozyevaya line opened in 1952, and in 1954 the Ring Line was completed. Cold War era. The beginning of the Cold War led to the construction of a deep section of the Arbatsko-Pokrovskaya line. The stations on this line were planned as shelters in the event of nuclear war. After finishing the line in 1953, the upper tracks between Ploshchad Revolyutsy and Kievskaya were closed, and later reopened in 1958 as a part of the Filyovskaya line. In the further development of the metro, the term stages was not used anymore, although sometimes the stations opened in 1957 to 1959 are referred to as the fifth stage. Other stations, too, were supplied with tight gates and life sustenance systems to function as nuclear shelters. During the late 1950s, the architectural extravagance of new metro stations was toned down, and decorations at some stations were simplified by comparison with the original plans. This was done on the orders of Nikita Khrushchev, who favored more Spartan decoration. A typical layout was developed for all new stations, and the stations were built to look almost identical, differing from each other only in colors of the marble and ceramic tiles. Most stations were built with simpler, less costly technology. This was not always appropriate, and resulted in utilitarian design. For example, walls with cheap ceramic tiles were susceptible to train vibration, and some tiles eventually fell off. It was not always possible to replace the missing tiles with the ones of the same color, which eventually led to variegated parts of the walls. Not until the mid-1970s was the architectural extravagance restored and original designs again popular. However, the newer design of centipede stations continued to dominate Stalinist ideals publicizing the metro. The Moscow Metro was one of the USSR's most ambitious architectural projects. The metro's artists and architects worked to design a structure that embodied Svet and Svetlo Budushi, with the reflective marble walls, high ceilings and grand chandeliers. Many Moscow metro stations have been likened to an artificial underground sun. This palatial underground environment reminded riders that the tax rubles had been well spent on Svetlo Budushi. The chief lighting engineer was Abram Damsky, a graduate of the Higher State Art Technical Institute in Moscow. By 1930 he was a chief designer in Moscow's Elektrosvet factory, and during World War II was sent to the Metro Stroy factory as head of the lighting shop. Damsky recognized the importance of efficiency, as well as the potential for light as an expressive form. His team experimented with different materials and methods to optimize the technology. Damsky's discourse on lamps and architecture 1930 to 1950 describes in detail the epic chandeliers installed in the Kaluzskaya station and the Taganskaya station. The Kaluzskaya station was designed by the architect Polyakov. Polyakov's decision to base his design on a reinterpretation of Russian classical architecture clearly influenced the concept of the lamps, some of which I planned in collaboration with the architect himself. The shape of the lamps was a torch, the torch of victory, as Polyakov put it. The artistic quality and stylistic unity of all the lamps throughout the station's interior made them perhaps the most successful element of the architectural composition. All were made of cast aluminum decorated in a black and gold anodized coating, a technique which the Metro Stroy factory had only just mastered. The Taganskaya metro station on the Ring Line was designed in quite another style by the architects K.S. Ryzhkov and A. Medvedev. The subject matter dealt with images of war and victory. The overall effect was one of ceremony. In the platform halls, the blue ceramic bodies of the chandeliers played a more modest role, but still emphasized the overall expressiveness of the lamp. The work of Abram Damsky further publicized these ideas, hoping people would associate the party with Svetlo Budushi. Industrialization. Stalin's first 5-year plan facilitated rapid industrialization to build a socialist motherland. The plan was ambitious, seeking to reorient an agrarian society towards industrialism. It was Stalin's fanatical energy, large-scale planning, and smart resource distribution that kept up the incredible pace of industrialization. The first 5-year plan was instrumental in the completion of the Moscow Metro. Without industrialization, the Soviet Union would not have had the raw materials necessary for the project. For example, steel was a main component of many subway stations. Before industrialization, it would have been impossible for the Soviet Union to produce enough steel to incorporate it into the metro's design. In addition, a steel shortage would have limited the size of the subway system and its technological advancement. The Moscow Metro furthered the construction of a socialist Soviet Union because the project accorded with Stalin's second five-year plan. The second plan focused on urbanization and the development of social services. The Moscow metro was necessary to cope with the influx of peasants who migrated to the city during the 1930s. Moscow's population grew to 3.6 million in 1933 from 2.16 million in 1928. The metro also bolstered Moscow's shaky infrastructure and its communal services, which hitherto were nearly non-existent. Mobilization. The Communist Party had the power to mobilize. Because the party was a single source of control, it could focus its resources and inspire its people. The most notable example of mobilization in the Soviet Union occurred during World War II. The country also mobilized in order to complete the Moscow metro with unprecedented speed. One of the main motivation factors of the mobilization was to overtake the West and prove that a socialist metro could surpass capitalist designs. It was especially important to the Soviet Union that socialism succeed industrially, technologically, and artistically in the 1930s, since capitalism was at a low ebb during the Great Depression. The person in charge of metro mobilization was Lazar Kaganovich, a prominent party member. He assumed control of the project as chief overseer. Kaganovich was nicknamed the Iron Commissar. He shared Stalin's fanatical energy, dramatic oratory flair, and ability to keep workers building quickly with threats and punishment. He was determined to realize the Moscow metro, regardless of cost. Without Kaganovich's managerial ability, the Moscow metro might have met the same fate as the Palace of the Soviets: failure. This was a comprehensive mobilization. The project drew resources and workers from the entire Soviet Union. In his article, archaeologist Mike O'Mahony describes the scope of the metro mobilization. A specialist workforce had been drawn from many different regions, including miners from the Ukrainian and Siberian coalfields and construction workers from the iron and steel mills of Magnitogorsk, the Dnipro hydroelectric power station, and the Turkestan-Siberian Railway. Materials used in the construction of the metro included iron from Siberian Kuznets, timber from northern Russia, cement from the Volga region and the North Caucasus, bitumen from Baku, and marble and granite from quarries in Karelia, the Crimea, the Caucasus, the Urals, and the Soviet Far East. Skilled engineers were scarce, and unskilled workers were instrumental to the realization of the metro. The metro Stroy conducted massive recruitment campaigns. It printed 15,000 copies of Udarnik Metro Storia and 700 other newsletters to attract unskilled laborers. Kaganovich was closely involved in the recruitment campaign, targeting the Komsomol generation because of its strength and youth. Patriotic influences. When the metro opened in 1935, it immediately became the centerpiece of the transportation system. More than that, it was a Stalinist device to awe and control the populace, and give them an appreciation of Soviet realist art. It became the prototype for future Soviet large-scale technologies. Kaganovich was in charge. He designed the subway so that citizens would absorb the values and ethos of Stalinist civilization as they rode. The artwork of the 13 original stations became nationally and internationally famous. For example, the Sverdlov Square subway station featured porcelain bas-reliefs depicting the daily life of the Soviet peoples, and the bas-reliefs at the Dynamo Stadium sports complex glorified sports and physical prowess on the powerful new Homo Sovieticus. The metro was touted as the symbol of the new social order, a sort of communist cathedral of engineering modernity. The metro was iconic also because it showcased socialist realism in public art. Socialist realism was in fact a method, not a style. This method was influenced by Nikolai Chernyshevsky, Lenin's favorite 19th-century nihilist, who stated that art is no use unless it serves politics. This maxim explains why the stations combined aesthetics, technology and ideology. Any plan which did not incorporate all three areas cohesively was rejected. Without this cohesion, the metro would not reflect socialist realism. If the metro did not utilize socialist realism, it would fail to illustrate Stalinist values and transform Soviet citizens into socialists. Anything less than socialist realism's grand artistic complexity would fail to inspire a long-lasting, nationalistic attachment to Stalin's new society. Logo. The first line of the Moscow metro was launched in 1935, complete with the first logo, the capital M paired with the text. There is no accurate information about the author of the logo, so it is often attributed to the architects of the first stations, Samuil Kravitz, Ivan Taranov and Nadezhda Baikova. It is noteworthy, however, that even at the opening in 1935, the M letter on the logo had no definite shape. Today, with at least 10 different variations of the shape in use, Moscow Metro still does not have clear brand logo guidelines. An attempt was made in October 2013 to launch a nationwide brand image competition, only to be closed several hours after its announcement. A similar contest, held independently later that year by the design crowdsourcing company Design Contest, yielded better results, though none was officially accepted by the metro officials.